Hey everyone, you're listening to the Simply Smarter podcast. Our goal is to help families navigate some of the areas surrounding the college prep process, which includes providing college and ACT-related advice, not just for students, but their families as well. This is my co-host, Caleb.
Listen each week to find out how students can score better on college placement tests, learning techniques and methods that build confidence, beat test anxiety, and identify strengths within each student.
Don't forget to stay in the know by subscribing to our podcast. Welcome to the Simply Smarter podcast. Happy New Year. I can't believe it's 2022 already. Crazy. Today, we're kicking off season 5 with a very special guest, Stephen Heiner. Some of our listeners may already know Stephen or have heard of him at least. Stephen was the president of Get Smarter Prep from 2006 to 2012, as well as one of our top tutors here. We're going to be picking his brain about how things have changed in 16 years. However, tables will be turned a little bit today as Stephen will be asking Caleb and I questions as well. I cannot wait. Let's get started. Without further ado, let's welcome Stephen Heiner. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have you. It's good to meet you. It was my first time meeting you today.
Yes, me too, for you.
So I've heard a lot about you from Caleb and some of our past tutors and students. So just really fortunate to be able to meet you and have you in America.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, welcome back. It's so good to see you. It's been quite a few years now, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, since I was at Get Smarter and in the whole test prep industry, yeah, it's been a while.
For sure.
Yeah, so you left in 2012.
Well, I left running Get Smarter, and I took a bit of a break. What was interesting was when the sale closed, it was October 1st of 2012. But as you know, there's an October SAT and there's an October ACT. So the staff went out for dinner, fancy dinner to celebrate, and then we all went back to work the next day.
Yeah.
I was no longer in any sort of executive role. I had relinquished that to Lyndon back in May of that year, but I still had students. Right. So I continued to tutor for the October ACT, the October SAT, and then I thought, okay, then I'm going to get to go on vacation. So then I got to take some trips and celebrate, but essentially selling the business was a one-day thing and then back to work tutoring the next day.
100%.
Yeah, not usually how that works.
Right.
But
you don't normally have to say, well, I'm going to take my vacation from selling my business after the October SAT.
Right.
Right. Yeah, the timing doesn't work out quite the same way.
Exactly. So catch us up. What have you been doing since then?
So I continued to work for Get Smarter for a year while I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And part of that was I had an instinct that I thought I would move to Europe. But I had studied abroad as a student in Italy during undergrad. But when you come back to America and you get back into the flow of things and you get a job, you start a business or whatever else, then those ideas get buried. But selling a business gives you the opportunity to uncover potentially some things you put away in your dream closet. It's like, go, you try it out. Does this still fit? Do I still want to do this? And the challenge as a non-citizen of the EU and as someone who's not married to an EU citizen or doesn't have a job offer in the EU is how do you move? How do you immigrate? And then, by the way, they speak French in France. and
I take it you do not.
Well,
or some.
Well, there's I always say there's a difference between studying a language and learning a language.
Yes.
That learning a language happens in an immersive environment, right? The amount of progress you're going to make, in Mexico is speaking Spanish over 2 weeks versus 2 years in a classroom,
right,
is just vastly different, especially with a language like French where the noises are so weird to an English speaker. You have to, when you're speaking French, you have to turn off your English speaking brain, which is constantly making fun of you. They're like, what is that noise that you just made? Is that a word? Like the number one in French is it's UN, it's spelled this way. So an English speaker goes, oh, is that un or un or something like that? And it's
Okay.
That's the number one. And when you're doing that early on in your French experience, your English speaking brain is like, you're an idiot. What is that noise that you just made? It's like, that's French. And so you have to turn off that English speaking part of your brain, just say, I'm speaking this other language. Whereas a language like Spanish or a language like German, the letters that are there, you say all of the letters. Hop on Hof, right? Like all of those letters get pronounced.
Right.
In French, half of the letters aren't pronounced. And then also you have to suppress the instinct to laugh sometimes at things that don't make any sense to you. So the word in French for lawyer is the same word as avocado, right? So when someone says je suis avocat, your English speaking brain's like, I am an avocado. It's like, no, they're a lawyer, right?
Wow.
And yes, the context would tell you no one's going to introduce themselves as an avocado,
right?
Probably.
Yeah.
But that whole experience of moving to France was preceded by paperwork. How do I apply for a visa? What do I have to prove to the French government that they're going to let me in? How do I renew that visa? How do I get the right to start a business in that country? So when I did all that paperwork, I continued to work for Get Smarter, way before remote was cool.
Right.
Before we were tutoring remote at Get Smarter for years before anybody knew. And part of that was I had these families who I tutored the older children, and they're like, well, Stephen's going to tutor the other children. It's like, well, I don't live in America. That's fine. There's this thing called Skype. And so I continued to work for Get Smarter in a limited role while I started a tour guide business. I started a digital marketing agency, and over time, just things moved toward now I have a small boutique content marketing business, right? I write articles for small businesses. But it also meant changing my orientation that in America, work is such a defining aspect of our lives. And in Europe, it's not in any of the European countries. And just coming down off of that way of life. And, I moved to America when I was 9 years old. So it's very much something that I take for granted. But then you move to Europe and the entire culture presses in on you to think differently. And then you adjust. And then you're no longer pushing in the same way that you did here. I think there's this relentless pressure in America to just keep working. There was a meme I shared on LinkedIn over the summer that, European out of office email. I'm camping in the summer. I'll be back in September. American out of office email. I'm going to have my liver removed, but I will be available by telephone at any time.
Yes, 100%, 100%.
I mean, I had my vacation reminder set for over the new year, and it felt weird. It felt kind of uncomfortable. I was still checking my emails and responding.
Having a child. I mean, 6 weeks is like the minimum. I went back after 6 weeks with Kate, my firstborn, and was still checking emails at the hospital. They called me at the hospital.
I will be breastfeeding. However, I will be taking calls.
I know. Like, come on.
With my other hand.
Leave me alone. That was not for Get Smarter Prep, by the way.
Thank you.
Previous company.
That's it. And if you try to explain that situation to a European person, they would just look at you like you're from Mars.
Yes. Yeah.
That's just how we are. It's different.
Yeah.
It's neither right nor wrong. I think in a certain sense, you just have to come to realize that we've created societies for ourselves based on the values that we have. And that's just how it is in these different countries. And you can decide what you want to do with that. That's right.
And how is the stress level over there? So now we're talking about work-life balance.
What is this stress you are?
Right. Exactly.
It's totally different. Whenever people come to Paris and I show them around and we're in a park and it's Tuesday at 11 a.m. You know what the first question an American asks is, don't these people work?
Right.
Because the idea that you would be at a park on a weekday morning is a crazy idea because it's such a luxury. And if you think about that, and what is the counterpoint to that? It's like, well, what is life about? Is life about paying bills and going to work every day and then you die? Well, apparently, because the very first question is, well, why are these people here? It's because it's a sunny day and there's a park. Part of that, too, is Paris's urban design, that parks are all over the place. So you don't have to drive to a park. Just like driving to the gym is this sort of hilarious exercise. So I'm going to get in a car and drive to some place where I'm going to exercise in a room. So parks are everywhere. So businessmen can leave and have a lunch out in this sort of open area. Or if they say, I'm going to take a break, it's not a 15-minute break. break and we're going to need you to clock back in at 10:15.
Right.
That there's no such sort of thing. And Chris Rock has a very funny bit from years and years ago. He said, even in jail, you get an hour lunch. He's like, I just need to go to jail so I can get an hour lunch. And it's been parodied numerous times in American comedy that, you know, by the time you get to Subway and pay and try to eat it on top of your computer and then like you spill Coke on your keyboard, that this whole exercise, it is not a lie that the French take minimum 90 minutes for lunch, sometimes 2 hours. That is every day.
Wow.
And when you insert this pause, then there's this division of we're going to do some work in the morning, we're going to do some work in the afternoon, and then we're done. Mm-hmm. It's such that even in places like in Germany, there's a law that the companies can't email you after 5 on a Friday. The servers have to be turned off.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm watching Emily in Paris, right? Have you seen any of it?
I have not.
Okay.
This is a Netflix show?
This is a Netflix show. It's season 3 or 2. I don't know. Season 2, I think. Anyway, that's the thing. I mean, they take really long lunches, and she was trying to work on the weekend, and her coworkers were like, what are you doing? Stop it. Don't work on the weekends. It's not a thing. And it was just so ingrained in her because she's, you know, from the United States. And so you work all the time as a 20-something-year-old. You work all the time. So, I mean, that does parallel reality.
And again, it goes back to what are our values, and a lot of people will, because the idea is if you're not moving at America's pace, it must be because you're lazy, right? So and whether we like it or not, it's subconsciously implanted in our heads. Sure. I'll admit to it. But then you get there and there's a reality of, well, what is the end game? What is all of this for? All of this is for, I have a life. I have been, you know, I've come into this world and I will die someday. And what is it that is going to be my legacy? And at whatever level, whether that's you have children or you don't. And in Europe, because they've been around so long, thousands of years as a civilization, there's been a sense of, okay, well, we built out the land, we have farms, there's stuff that you can do. But America, we have been hustling since the beginning. I've got to clear the forest. I've got to shoot some game. I've got to plant some corn. Well, that's never really ended, at least mentally, because and what's wonderful about that is, I mean, I myself was an immigrant to the U.S., even though I was already a citizen, that there's a tremendous energy that comes with that. That, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to build this business. I mean, Get Smarter is at a location now that it didn't used to be, and at that time, if you looked south of this street, it was nothing.
Right.
And now, you know, every time I come, like when I was driving here today, I was like, oh, there's a Chewy's here now. Okay, well, that's great.
Yeah.
But there's always this new growth and development. And that's part of this irresistible American desire to grow. And we've never, even though the frontier has been settled and that's done, it's in our DNA, and that's part of we draw people from all around the world to America to have that. The problem is that means it's never good enough. In France, in Europe, they've done all that, and it is good enough.
Right.
So there's this, and Paulo Coelho tells this story of this Mexican fisherman very famously, that this American comes down, has a wonderful time, and he tells the Mexican, you know what you should do? I had this great fishing trip with you today. You know, you should invest in a couple boats, and then you could build a fleet, and then one day you could sell it. And then the fisherman's confused. Well, why would he do that? He says, well, you know, so you could have more free time. And he says, oh, you mean like I have now?
So that I can fish?
So that I can fish for a living, spend time with my kids, spend time with my wife, and play guitar with my friends at night. So I need to build a business in order to have the life that I have now. And so one of the arguing points that sometimes my friends who've come to America to work from France, and they talk about, they say, well, you know, there's so much more money to be made in America. America pays so much more money because there's so much more social cost that's built into your salaries in Europe. So the salaries appear to be much lower, but there's all these benefits that we wouldn't possibly dream of in America. But whatever the compensation is, it's a different cultural mindset. The idea, like I said, that the email servers would be turned off at Volkswagen on Friday afternoon, and that the corporation buys that.
Right.
So the corporation didn't have to be bullied into it.
Right.
Like, yeah, that's fine. We won't email you. But I think there's a cost and benefit. So part of that benefit is, okay, well, we have the country that we have. are we ever going to get time to enjoy it? And I think that's, if I would challenge any of my fellow Americans to have that question about, because you're free to build the life you want. Just because the culture is around you that way, it doesn't mean you're forced to think that way. But I think it's quite difficult to escape it unless you've been away for a while. As we were talking about before the show, that when you're swimming in water, you don't necessarily know. David Foster Wallace gave this very famous commencement address about, what is water? And you don't know that there's maybe a sky above, or you can go down here. And when you're surrounded by other people who are really hustling, you might feel lazy if you don't take some time back. And obviously there are some events that have happened in the last 18 months that have caused people to maybe step back and say, what am I doing with my life? And I actually think that that's a wonderful benefit, if we can be honest about it, that a lot of people have been forced to ask. They were forced to slow down. They were forced to stop and say, well, what is it that I am doing with my life?
Right.
Am I happy about that? And I would not change that for anything. If it took a really weird, catastrophic, tragic event, I am happy to do that again. If it meant that some people changed their lives for the better.
Right. Well, it looks like we're all moving to France. So,
and
sadly, this is our last episode. I hope you enjoyed it.
If you want bread that is French level quality, Black Dog on 87.
Love Black Dog.
Amazing bread.
We're big Black Dog bakery.
Well, by the way, listeners, I have now checked the local knowledge box that precedes every Simply Smarter episode, which I was afraid, am I going to be able to pull this off? Yes. About the tip for Black Dog. There's Ibis Bakery that's attached to, right? So the care, when I bite into that bread, I taste the love that is normal at every French bakery, and it's delicious. So if you didn't know about it, we just shared that secret with you.
Oh, it's delicious.
It's fantastic.
I love it. Well, you wanted to ask some questions to us and kind of turn the tables. You were here from kind of the ground up, and you were wondering, in the past 10, 15, 16 years, what's changed?
Right. So I've been listening to these episodes. It's funny. I always wonder if you look at your numbers and say, we have a listener in Hungary. It's like, no, that was just me. I was walking in Budapest that day, and I was listening to an episode. And as much as we'd like Simply Smarter listeners in Hungary, that listening to you all talk about these changes, I just like, oh, that's really interesting. I've been out of it for so many years and then there was this major event that happened last year.
Right.
And so you've been subject to a number of changes that happened prior to COVID, and then COVID obviously changed the game, continues to change the game. So I was curious, just as a regular Simply Smarter listener and as someone who was in the industry a long time ago, what's changed. And I suppose with it being the beginning of the second semester, and this would be an admission season, that might be a logical place to start. How has admissions changed? I would say broadly first in the last 10 years, and then because you've had some episodes where you're talking about resume and what your personal brand is and what you can do, but maybe start with the more recent, what's changed for admissions in the last 18 months.
Man, everything. where to begin with that? I think over the last 10 years there have been some kind of subtle shifts and changes in the admissions process, but nothing like we've seen over the last 2 years. And this is I think one of the biggest challenges I think for families is the fact that the decisions are getting made so late in the process.
Yes.
Right. I think that is one of the biggest obstacles in order to make good decisions. And colleges aren't deciding what's going to be required for the next class until April, May, June, at the end of junior year, right? And you know our world. Like we love working with students during that junior year, helping them prepare for what's lying ahead and knowing kind of how am I scoring, what kind of schools can I actually have on my list, what is a reach school for me. At this point, students don't know until kind of almost too late in some cases. We work with more seniors than we've ever worked with, like ever. This past fall, and it's because they finally realized, oh shoot, we do need to take the test, we do need to prepare, we do need help with our college essays, those kinds of things, and it all happens so much later than it has ever happened before. I think that would be one of the big pieces. And then just so many schools going test optional. I think that's been a big piece that not only for us, but just for students to try to manage and figure out what that looks like.
When I feel like you had an explainer, am I wrong? You had an explainer episode about, what, is test optional really optional?
Right.
What does that really mean?
Test option, it means so many different things. Every school treats
is
it differently.
different. Yeah, almost.
Right?
And do you see these changes becoming institutionalized or just an adjustment to this current period?
I think, so from our conversations with the universities, we think that, I think it's a temporary thing. I think there's still assessing, right? The first class was 2021 who kind of went this route with test optional for these schools, and they were kind of forced into it. And now they just had the end of the first semester, so they're assessing like, how did our students do? Did we have a larger number of students fail classes than normal?
Because
like,
they have all the historical data,
right? So they're finally just now, like literally this week, probably looking at all that data. And I don't know if they'll make a decision sometime this spring. I think it'll be after the end of the year, but I think they'll start leaning one way or another. And I think a lot of the schools, and again, I think on top of not having scores for a lot of students, again, what were they making their decisions based upon? I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like there was no extracurricular activities for a year.
Right.
What did grades mean? Like, I don't know. So many schools are still pass fail.
But ironically, in 2021, they had ACT just came out with this like last week. They had a record number of students taking the ACT, over 1 million students.
Yeah.
Which is higher than it's ever been. So students are still taking the ACT regardless.
Well, and that gets me to a second and third part of that. So you answered from the institutional perspective that part of the question has been regarding the Great Resignation. What am I doing with my life? What am I doing with jobs? But the question for students is, okay, is college the path for me? Maybe parents like, do I want to spend all this money for you to go to school on Zoom, I suppose? Have you seen a shift in student thinking about college, timing of college, parent thinking about spend at college experience, pause?
I think we saw that initially. Again, even locally, like KU was down about 10 or 11% in enrollment in fall of 2020. People just deferring their registration for a year because everything was going to be online, and students just didn't want to do that.
No.
And they just hung out for a year?
Basically, because there weren't, the economy wasn't doing great, so they really were just kind of hanging out or
couldn't travel,
right? You know that one well. So it was just a very interesting time frame, but enrollment numbers this past fall seemed to be much stronger.
The same or higher?
Higher.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a bit of a bounce back.
Yeah, for sure. So in that regard, I think we're a little bit back to normal, quote unquote, when it comes to kind of what students are deciding to do. It's just everything's still up in the air and they just don't know how to proceed. I think that's the bigger obstacle.
Mm-hmm. So more of this is a temporary obstacle to be overcome rather than a moment to step back and ask, is this something we still want to do?
Yeah, I generally think so. I think most families that we work with at least are still in the mindset of, hey, college, this is still something we want for our student. And I think most students are still on board with that.
I think so too. We've been in our neighborhood for 5 years, and I've kind of watched this group, they're now juniors, grow up, right? And all of them are taking the ACT. All of them are looking forward to going to college. And so this has been on the horizon for their whole life, and now is the time to act on this. And they're all looking forward to it. They're all really excited about it. So I think COVID was, a slight pause, but in their future, they always knew that college was still going to be an option, no matter how they get there. Yeah. And everything is still moving forward with that.
That's really interesting. So obviously test scores have changed a lot. So they had changed in the, I don't know what to call it, the early era of Get Smarter, that there was a change to the SAT.
Right.
And then you've already had other episodes, so I don't want to go back over that ground. But how, you could say broadly, have the tests changed since my time? So let's say 2012, 2013 to now. Do you see an evolution continuing, or is this sort of a change that they make and they're like, well, we don't really want to do changes again for a while? Or is the velocity of change increasing over time?
Yeah, ACT has been pretty consistent about this for decades, probably, where they just make small incremental changes along the way every couple years. We haven't seen a lot. I mean, from 2012, there are 6 science passages and not 7. So little things like that, but same number of questions, same amount of time. There have been one of the changes in ACT that they have done a little bit more of computer-based testing. So like Blue Valley 2 or 3 years ago, every student took it on a computer, which I think the school district learned was a mess and a poor decision, and decided to kind of go back to pencil and paper. So I think that's one of those things that ACT is still trying to do. I don't know if you remember back in 2012, we were sitting around and ACT said, by 2015, 90% of students were going to be taking the test by computer. Right. Here we are in 2022, and it's still only 10% or so.
Whoa, let's pause there for a second. No. 2022. How did that sound?
Here we are.
What?
I didn't screw it up. I thought I would.
I'm so impressed because I'm certain Jill and I are going to screw it up at some point. Refer to this year, 2021.
Like,
so thank you for setting the standard there.
Other than that, ACT introduced something new in the reading section this year, where there is one passage with 2 or 3 questions dealing with a graph or a chart, which is kind of mirrors the SAT, and we'll get into that in a second. Okay. So nothing huge. Content-wise, math, it's still basically the same stuff. We've seen more ellipse questions. Which is kind of interesting, kind of fun.
Yes.
Because if you know it's pretty easy, but if you don't, oh shoot. There have been some interesting pattern questions and things like that they've introduced. Kind of things that I've seen on GRE and GMAT for a while, but kind of fun. SAT, on the other hand, in 2015, they did their complete redesign again, right? When Get Smarter Prep started, they had just gone through the first redesign,
they moved from the 1600 to the
2400.
Mm-hmm. I want to make sure I got my numbers right.
And got rid of the analogies and all that stuff, right?
Right.
Well, in 2015, they moved even further away from what they were doing and got rid of all the vocab and all of that, which made the test completely different. It's back to a 1600 scale. But with that, now you have 2 math sections, one with a calculator and one without. That makes up half of your score. So it's kind of interesting. In the past, pre-2015, most students who were stronger in math tended to do better on the ACT. And now it's shifted a little bit, because the SAT is half your score is math. Mm-hmm. The other half is reading and then the writing and language sections. So it's been fascinating in that way. Pacing, students still have terrible time with pacing on the ACT in general. They try to rush and try to get through too many questions, whereas the SAT, almost everybody finishes. Everybody still says they feel more comfortable there, but they just don't. They still don't score as well as they do on the ACT in most cases. Mm-hmm. We've also seen interesting shifts within our market. Right? Like, you remember our Pembroke students, almost all of them were preparing for SAT. Like, it was just a giant percent who just did better.
There was a question like, is there another test? What is this ACT that you speak of?
And now most Pembroke students perform better on the ACT. It's just these little shifts that are happening because of the big shift SAT made, just within what we see day in and day out. So it's kind of interesting.
But if I could wave a Get Smarter flag a little bit, I would say probably that's some consumer education happening in the market.
There's a little bit.
That's getting people to understand that there's no brand name to the test. That one is in New Jersey and one is in the Midwest. And,
right.
Things that are on the coast are better. ... Whatever that means. and that the one that's on the coast has to innovate and be cool and exciting all the time. And the steady Eddie Midwestern one's like, no, we're not going to change it.
Right.
Yeah, we're good.
We're in Iowa. This is how it is.
Yeah.
The schools have also had to adopt in the most recent time period with remote and in person. So what about, and I think I had alluded to the fact that we were doing remote before it was a thing. That how has your student mix changed and it continues to evolve?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. Our families were very gracious and very willing to go with us early on in the pandemic. We did a lot online, of course, but as soon as businesses were allowed to open again, a large majority, I'd probably say in the summer of 2020, probably 70% of families chose to still be in person. Mm-hmm. And it just, again, online I think is great for a lot of people, but I think the experience that students had in school, and again, I recognize this, I'm not sure if everybody else does, but one-on-one tutoring online is very different than a classroom setting online. And I think that our tutoring, our numbers were still very strong during that time frame, but people just wanted to be interacting with humans. I think was part of it, and I felt like they believed that they learned better in person. Mm-hmm. So now it's probably 95% of our business is still in person. I worked with a couple students from Texas and Chicago recently, but most of it is local here in Casey.
Well, I do think, as you say, it's context. Obviously, online tutoring works because we've done it and we watch the scores go up, and that happens. But you can't ignore the context. Well, if it's online all day, and if I've got 9 hours of online, and then I've got to do another hour and a half online, there's literally things like eye strain, and I'm tired of this. And so we forget sometimes that yes, we can be effective. It doesn't mean that it's a great experience, though. And part of how we're getting kids to do school stuff outside of school hours is by making this fun and by showing them, hey, I know that math isn't quote unquote your thing, but we're going to show you how to do this. And part of that camaraderie and part of the ability to get through to the student is doing that in person. And it's hard to get them sort of ginned up and excited over a camera. As I say, it can be done, but I tend to
They're
be
also
more of a challenge.
Distracted. I mean, they could have their phone sitting right here. Or their sister could walk into the room.
Or the dog.
Yes. Yeah, there's so many distractions. Yeah.
To your point, though, I think you'll appreciate the story. So a family who lives in my neighborhood, they came through in the fall, and they were great. They were a really fun family to work with, especially since I know them to some degree out of work. And after the first session, the mom called me and said, you know what? My daughter had no idea it was going to be fun. She was kind of dumbfounded. And it was just kind of that idea, like, we do try to make it more accessible and more enjoyable. And it's not just like just memorization and just sit here and do what we say, and it's very interactive, and you can think differently, creatively.
Kids have their prejudices too. They don't realize it could be fun.
Right.
Parents sign me up for this tutoring.
Right.
I guess I'll go. Right. And you'll see them that first day. They have their arms crossed.
Right.
I'm just here so I don't get fined. Right. And then, after they started like, wait, hold on, this guy's funny. Or this girl has jokes,
right?
And then they see everyone else laugh. It's like, it's okay for me to laugh. Right. Oh, I'm learning something. Oh, before they realize it, they're writing down notes, paying attention. They're asking questions, and then they're showing up to Friday Extra Help,
right?
Doing all the nerdy stuff. Right. Like, all right, now we've got you.
I love it.
So, have the students changed in their orientation? So I think about the era we came up in, way back in the Stone Ages. We went to college, and there were these things called paper applications.
Oh boy!
And you had to put things in the mail.
In the mailbox.
And obviously, we've talked about it becoming so much more difficult in, let's say, that early era when I was leaving Get Smarter, and now you 10 years later have had to see even more. Have the way that students been approaching college changed significantly? Obviously, from our era, they have, but would you say it's gone even more so from 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think the Common App has just become larger and larger, and a bigger influence on the process. I take it back to a personal side because I talk to the parents more regularly even than some of our clients. They have a daughter who I worked with last year. She's a senior. She's applying to like 20 some schools and has been writing essays for months now, right? Because it's just so easy to apply to colleges now, right? It just changes the process and changes the mindset. And she has a phenomenal score. And is very bright and very likable, and she just is stretching herself. She's trying to find the right school for her, and hasn't been able to visit a lot of them. They've gone to probably 6 or 7 so far, but
I mean, that feels exceptional to me. It's an outlier,
yes.
right? Because
I think so.
Because I remember always coming down on my kids who would try to apply to, I would say north of 10 usually, I would start to cross my arms.
Right,
and I'd say,
100%.
Okay, which one of these do you already not like?
Right.
Okay, because there's 10 here.
Right.
9 of these are going to be eliminated.
Right.
So then you sort of push them into, okay, well, I really like X, Y, and Z. Okay, so then which one of these are A, B, and C that we can remove and really just, okay, now we can focus on this? Because as you say, we can't underestimate. If I'm writing essays for months, there are other things that are going to be left to the side.
Yeah.
And I do still want to encourage people. Part of the joy when I was in my 15 years of test prep was you got to experience high school without any of the stress. So they would tell you about, oh, this is what's happening for prom, or, this was what happened at homecoming. And you're like, okay, I remember these moments myself. And
yes.
you were caught into that excitement, but then you could just leave it. I don't have any of those consequences. Right. I don't have to do homework tonight. You have to do homework.
Right.
Yes.
And that joy. And during my era, I watched this transformation of hours and hours of homework, being going to bed at midnight or 1 o'clock. It's like, I never went to bed at midnight or 1 o'clock, and I'm half Asian, right? Like, I would still get to bed at a reasonable time period. And these kids, I felt, were moving towards this overscheduled, they're already at their 90-hour-a-week job, and you're 17. It's like, hey, don't worry.
Right.
You've got the rest of your life to be children. I remember finding out that in Finland, they don't have homework. And when they would interview the teachers and the principals and the superintendents, they said, well, they've got to have some time to be children.
Right.
Like, well, what a radical concept. It's
Right.
wild. Totally unacceptable in Asia, right?
Oh,
and homework is the law. and so I remember thinking, and I would push back on parents and students during that era, let's say my era, 2012, 2003, and said, don't forget to enjoy that sort of Ferris Bueller philosophy.
Right.
Life moves pretty fast. You need to take some time to enjoy it.
Yeah.
So having been out of it 10 years, please tell me it hasn't gotten.
It's probably gone more.
Oh, no.
No, I think we had that hiatus with COVID where people, they saw the value. They were all home. They enjoyed time with family. And then as soon as school started again, it was back to it. And I literally hear my students, and again, I do not advocate this, and I encourage sleep and rest and finding enjoyment in life, but the students will be doing homework until 1 or 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And they're doing a lot of extracurricular activities, is anything that they can do. So I've seen more burnout this year. It was interesting, actually, when school started in 2020, just the adjustment of like going back in person and the same rigor and the same demand, because I think
that very long summer slide.
Right. Because with school online, I mean, most students were doing their work in an hour or 2.
And they were
nothing serious.
Done by
online.
11 o'clock. Yeah.
Right. And there was a serious fatigue in students in that time frame. You'll also find this interesting. Even some of the highest scoring students, it was interesting to see the gaps that they had in their curriculum, especially if they were taking Algebra 2 during the spring of 2020.
Okay.
Just the things that we just have always taken for granted that everybody knows this, and they didn't.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's interesting.
I had 2 students from the photo shoot that rode with me to the photo shoot location, and just having a conversation with them and listening to them, they said the exact same thing, where like, we actually didn't learn this. It was skipped. Like, we didn't learn this, and then we're supposed to compound on, keep on going. So we had to teach ourselves, or again, like, they were up until midnight, 1:30, and I looked at them and said, you gotta be kidding me. Are you serious? Like, are you starting at 11, or when do you start your homework? Like, while we have our sport, and then we have spent a little bit of time with our family, we eat, and then we start our homework, and we have like 3 to 4 hours a night. I was blown away by that. Blown away.
We definitely had it easier. I think.
I remember doing a lot of. I was busy all the time.
I mean, I had AP. I played sports. I played sport every season, but I did not. I did not have 4 hours of homework a night.
No.
I just didn't.
I think I probably averaged 2 or 3. which
and I
was
don't
more than
remember
enough.
the level of fatigue, and then that's why I noticed it so much, because as I say, you're reliving high school with them, and you can. I was like, oh, it's AP US this week. I said, hey, did you study this? Did you study? Because I remember having to do all that myself, but I did not remember having 4 hours. I did not remember looking sleep deprived like they did, and I would push back and say, make sure you get some sleep. And that was a big part of the curriculum for us. I think it probably still is in the manual, that part of the last week is talking them out of long study sessions. Like, there's very little we're going to do this last week. You're not going to jump up 5 points by doing 7 hours of studying every night, like for the next week. Like it's over. We're set. We took a midterm. We took a final. We know where we are. We're just going to make little tweaks and adjustments. But one of the biggest things that you can do this week is get some sleep, get some rest, and you throw some research their way. I remember an episode where you're saying, if you're hydrated, X percentage down. And I remember thinking, I stopped the podcast at that point. It's like,
where's my water? Where's my water?
Where's my water? I was like, I'm going to be living with water, while at my job. And I think they underestimate that, partially because they're pushing themselves to the brink every single day. So they just think it's going to be another Saturday. It's like, no, this is a pretty big Saturday. And I know that I'd be willing to lose your homework on Thursday and Friday if it means you get a little bit more sleep in the final 72 hours. I will take it, and I will go to your parents to make that case. Like, I'm okay with them not finishing their homework on this Thursday and this Friday, so we can reap the fruits this Saturday. Come beat me up about it. So
that's a good point.
I had a couple students that I had to battle in December to get them to not study Thursday, Friday. I told them, like, maybe review some notes until 4 o'clock, like after school on the Friday, and then just nothing. Just enjoy the evening.
What are you talking about?
And it took a lot of convincing.
Join us next week as we continue our conversation with Stephen. Don't forget to subscribe to the Simply Smarter podcast to always stay in the know about all things ACT. See you next week.